Watch right now on the Front News Project. Crimean hell for Russia. Hundreds of explosions at oil depots. Ukrainian armed forces drones are destroying the enemy on the peninsula. Tomahawks for Ukraine are coming. Trump made a decision under pressure. All of Russia get ready for Moscow. And also, Russian conscripts are deserting en masse from the so-called Second Army of the world. Exclusive video. Fiery, hot and blazing. Watch footage from the front lines right now. Greetings, this is Vladimir Timoshenko with you, and we're starting right away with the main topic. Russian military facilities in temporarily occupied Crimea are burning spectacularly. In particular, there is another large-scale fire at the Feodosia oil depot. Ukrainian armed forces drones are hitting their targets precisely. And also, Trump has now openly threatened Putin with providing Tomahawks to Ukraine if the war does not end on terms acceptable to Ukraine. Let's look at all the details.
A serious escalation and a nightmare for the Kremlin. This is all about the Tomahawk missiles, which may soon arrive in Ukraine to carry out combat missions.
Even the arrival of just 2 Tomahawks at an oil refinery on the territory of the occupying country is a serious challenge for the logistics of the occupying army and consequently will cause economic upheaval directly within the Russian Federation itself.
If Ukraine receives Tomahawk missiles, it will strike exclusively in a Russian manner. At military targets in Russia, President Volodymyr Zelensky stated,
"The Russian side is well aware of the tactical and technical characteristics of these cruise missiles. They are outside the range of the Russian air defense system." And while the initial statement from the Russian side regarding the possible transfer of Tomahawks was frankly political bluff, a bold claim that there would be an appropriate response from the occupying country, even hinting at a possible nuclear scenario. Now, statements from the Russian dictator only indicate that the Russian Federation will supposedly strengthen its air defense systems. But there is one significant but. The Russian Federation does not have air defense systems.
despite the destruction that Russia inflicts on Ukraine every day. For example, these images of the attack on Ukrainian Odessa on the night of October 13th, Ukrainians themselves are striking precisely at strategic targets of the occupiers in the temporarily occupied territories and on Russian territory itself.
I would like to draw attention to the Kafa substation. This is Feodosia, which is part of the energy bridge that connects the temporarily occupied Ukrainian Crimea with the mainland part of the Russian Federation. It should be noted that as a result of drone strikes by special operations forces, power transformers, a closed switchgear, the control room, as well as the room with protective automation, have been damaged. Voltage fluctuations have already begun.
These are shots of the fire at the Tavricheskaya TPP near Simferopol.
In addition, Special Operations Forces drone strikes also targeted the Simferopol substation. There were explosions there. A series of explosions. This substation, like the one in Feodosia, primarily supports the operations of the Russian occupation army.
The burning oil depot in Feodosia could be seen from several kilometers away. Local social media report that the smoke plume from the burning oil depot in Feodosia stretched all the way to Kerch and further across the strait.
Yeah, it looks like there might be another explosion at the oil depot itself again. It's all on fire right now. There are 6 or 7 spots burning.
I think it's more than that. We can't see the ones lined up next to each other anymore.
Around midnight, mobile internet was cut off in northern Crimea. Then the electricity in the villages went out too, and it only came back at 7:30 in the morning. It was a restless night in Rostov-on-Don and the Rostov region.
There it is. I see the flare. It went up into the...
Look at those beautiful fluffy clouds floating in the sky.
Ukrainian forces are conducting counteroffensive operations in the areas of Dobropilya in Donetsk region and near Orikhiv in the Zaporizhzhia direction, according to Commander-in-Chief Volodymyr Zelensky.
Ukraine's defense forces are demonstrating what is called an active defense. That is, whenever possible, they are successfully counterattacking. They are using the tactics of stylish drones. Ukraine's defense forces have inflicted colossal losses on the occupiers in both personnel and equipment. The ratio of irrecoverable and sanitary losses has actually reached 1 to 1. Although globally the usual ratio is 1 to 3, That is, for every one irrecoverable loss, the so-called KIA, there are 3 sanitary losses, wounded.
Ukraine's defense forces carried out successful counter-offensive actions in the Donetsk region, pushing back Russian troops near 4 settlements. At the same time, the occupiers, despite significant losses, continue to exert pressure and advance in these sectors of the front.
And now, an analysis of the operational situation on the much-suffering Pokrovsk direction of the front. The enemy's army, and here they're acting true to form. In the Pokrovsk direction, our defenders stopped 46 offensive actions by the aggressor in the areas of the settlements of Vladimirovka, Shakove, and Nikonorovka. Novoekonomikeskaya, Rodinskaya, Mirolyubovka, Romen, Lesovka, Pokrovsk, Udakhnaya, Novosergevka, Kotliarovka, Orekovaya, and Dakhnaya. And now our regular segment, Trash in the Russian Army. If you like it, give us a like and leave a comment. At least 50,000 Russian soldiers have deserted from the Russian army during the period of the Great War against Ukraine. This information became known due to leaks of documents from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. The real numbers, of course, are even higher, and that's not surprising. After all, monstrous crimes and violations of the rights of their own soldiers and their families are taking place in Putin's army. The occupiers themselves talk about this, and not just the prisoners. Here are the details.
I know about many violations. People were wiped out. I know of cases, I know where the bodies are buried. And there was a specific order regarding me that I was not to leave the combat position alive.
This convict occupier deserted his post after receiving an order not to be allowed to leave his position alive. He left together with another soldier who had received a similar order. That was the only way to stay alive.
I was unfortunately beaten quite precisely when I initially left for the very first time. They caught me and beat me very brutally with a bucket and a stick. They threw me into a pit. From the pit, I went on a combat mission in handcuffs.
What has happened to this occupier now is unknown, but the video was posted in Z channels as a final message before death.
The guys really ran away because it's extremely hard to get out of there alive at all.
And this is already the wife of the occupier Ivan, a Russian soldier who was initially declared missing. He refused to go on the mission after spending 2 days evacuating a fellow soldier from the front line. And then he was ordered to go out with other soldiers to monitor the troops so they wouldn't flee their positions. Ivan himself complained that many refused to follow orders and desert.
The guys just can't get through any further. Today, for example, I sent out a group of 6 people and only 3 came back. And now they're sitting there crying. We're scared, we won't go, we don't want to die, and so on. They can't get through this open area. I'm just sitting here myself, I say, I just don't want to push anyone.
In the end, Ivan was eliminated. As for the Sokniks, their numbers in the Russian army are only growing because they're treated like cannon fodder. And many choose to live in freedom, even on the run.
I am a saboteur. By specialty. We have 6 people left. There were 70. 6 left. There is a road of life here. From Bakhmut to Chasifor. It's so difficult to get through it. You drive along the paths, there is no road. The van is like this. You just realize who you're driving over.
Even Russian soldiers themselves say that the reason for such huge losses is, in particular, lack of preparation.
They recruit people who don't know shit. Millions are spent on their training. They arrive and they're sent straight to hell. That's it.
There's another option to surrender, but the Russian command has made a lot of effort to intimidate their subordinates. For example, they vividly describe supposed torture in Ukrainian captivity.
They say they foam you up, cut off your balls, things like that. Well, that's kind of what made me afraid to go too. They rarely talk about the balls, but always about the foam. So when I crossed over, I said, all right, guys, please don't foam me or anything. They said, what are you talking about? What foam? I told them that's what we hear, and they said, relax, everything will be fine. Come on, let's go. They treated me well.
That's why the occupiers choose the only path they see, desertion, leaving their posts without permission. According to leaked documents from the Russian Ministry of Defense, since the start of the so-called special military operation, about 50,000 people have deserted from the Russian army. And that's just the official number. In reality, the situation is much worse. But even if you just look at the documents, you can see a worsening trend. In recent months, the number of desertion cases has increased. For example, in Grozny, there are now 17% more cases than a year ago. And it's highly doubtful that the situation for Putin's army will improve.
Well then, now it's time to analyze the operational situation on the Alexandrovka front. The bloody rampage of the enemy army continues. And here, on the Alexandrovka front, the defense forces repelled 24 attacks on our troops' positions near populated areas. Ivanovka, Alexandrovgrad, Sosnovka, Seknevoe, Voronoe, Stepnoe, Verbovoe, Alexevka, and Novogrigorievka. And here is another extremely important topic. The Russian army is facing an unprecedented shortage of tanks. During the course of the Great War, the Kremlin has lost 20,000 of these combat vehicles. About the causes and consequences of the tank crisis faced by the invaders, more in our report.
Pilots from the 3rd Assault used 2 drones to destroy a Russian tank that was hidden in a forest belt. One of the drones flies straight into the barrel. Over the past year, videos like this showing the destruction of a tank have become quite rare since the Ukrainian armed forces have knocked out a huge amount of the occupiers' equipment. The Russian army is now essentially forced to carry out assaults on foot or using motorcycles.
They're running out of infantry fighting vehicles and tanks, so they have to put infantry simply on motorcycles or on unarmored civilian vehicles.
Since the start of the full-scale invasion, the Ukrainian armed forces have destroyed more than 11,000 Russian tanks. These are figures from the General Staff of the Ukrainian Command. Only a third of the tanks that were in the reserves of the Russian armed forces before the invasion of Ukraine remain.
After 3 years of war, Moscow has depleted its tank reserves to such an extent that, according to reports, they are almost exhausted. Although the Kremlin insists there are no problems replenishing its tanks. Notably, in 2022, Russia's tank reserves were stored at 24 bases across the entire country. And today only 9 such facilities remain in operation. Peter Suchio, military analyst.
Russia has significantly slowed the use of Soviet-era tanks on the front line as the gray zone is filled with Ukrainian UAVs, for which tanks are easy prey. Data on the loss of a large portion of tanks in the war with Ukraine since December 2022 is also confirmed by the American Institute for the Study of War.
Russia still has 46% of its pre-war stock of tanks, 42% of its pre-war stock of infantry fighting vehicles, and 48% of its pre-war stock of armored personnel carriers. Images of 8 Russian military depots apparently show that Russia has depleted most of its vehicle storage facilities. And a social media source estimated that Russia will likely exhaust its remaining stockpiles of tanks and armored vehicles by the end of 2025. Russia may have additional armored vehicles and tanks in covered storage that are not visible in satellite images.
The Russian Federation is now facing a dilemma. The stockpiles of Soviet-era armored vehicles are almost completely depleted. About 60% of the Soviet-era armored vehicles that were in long-term storage depots on the territory of the Russian Federation have effectively been destroyed by Ukrainian defense forces.
Over more than 3 years of war, the Kremlin has withdrawn most of its tanks from storage. These vehicles went from storage to depots and then to the front lines where they were destroyed, captured, or abandoned. The resources and efforts spent on restoring these vehicles did not pay off and failed to deliver the desired results on the battlefield. Now, there simply isn't the necessary amount of equipment anymore.
According to the latest intelligence data from open sources, as of today, Russia has only 2,887 tanks in storage, and more than half of them are in poor condition. Less than a quarter of them could be classified as fit for use on the battlefield. Fewer than 100 T-80 tanks were considered relatively modern, while the rest included outdated T-62, T-64, and T-72 tanks. Early models.
The Russian Federation is capable of reviving between 1,200 and 1,400 Soviet-era armored vehicles, but not of producing new ones. According to the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, the Russian Federation produces about 180 to 200 new tanks. But given the amount of armored vehicles being destroyed on the front line with Ukrainian defense forces, this is just a drop in the ocean.
Given figures from various sources, the question now is not whether decommissioned Russian tanks will appear on the battlefield, but when this might happen, and in general, whether it is possible to do so in the necessary quantities.
And now, an analysis of the situation on the Sloviansk and Kramatorsk fronts. The so-called Russian world continues here as well to destroy, kill, and maim. On the Sloviansk front, the enemy launched 3 attacks over the past day. These targeted the positions of our units near the settlements of Yampol, Srebryanka, and Vayemka. On the Kramatorsk front, 2 combat engagements were recorded. The invaders tried to advance towards Stupochki. Ukraine has made a breakthrough in missile production. The powerful long-range Flamingo and Neptune missiles are already actively striking military and energy targets behind enemy lines. We will talk about the prospects for domestic missile and combat drone production, as well as the damage they inflict on military infrastructure of the enemy.
The consequences of the war unleashed by Russia are starting to return to its own territory in the form of Ukrainian drones and long-range missiles. The General Staff does not deny that after Belgorod, Muscovites themselves may soon experience what a blackout is like.
The traffic light isn't working. This is Udanova. On the right, there are buildings 10, 12, and 14. Darkness. On the left is Udanova, darkness. Bleed, Putanogo, Yesenina, at the intersection. The traffic light is not currently working.
Meanwhile, 2 more Russian regions, Tyumen and Sverdlovsk oblasts, have introduced restrictions on gasoline sales. To one person, no more than 30 liters. Previously, this new measure affected the Khabarovsk Krai, Chelyabinsk Oblast, and the occupied Crimea. All these lines and empty gas stations are due to daily attacks on oil refineries. Commander-in-Chief Syrsky stated that in September, under the Deep Strike program, 70 hits on Russian territory were reported.
We are destroying the production of fuel and lubricants, explosives, and other components of the Russian military-industrial complex in the aggressor country. Among other things, oil production in Russia has decreased by 21%.
The intensification and expansion of Ukraine's so-called long-range sanctions on Russian territory became one of the main topics at the president's meeting with the security bloc.
Ukrainian long-range weaponry is becoming significantly more advanced. We are constantly working on this and have already provided a wide range of opportunities for production, the necessary funding, all the required support. It is necessary to scale up their use in a truly tangible way. We have clear plans regarding this for the coming months. Everything must be implemented. Ukrainian precision is already visible, but there should be more. It is absolutely fair that Ukraine delivers retaliatory strikes, targeted strikes, unlike Russia. We know what we want to achieve. Of course, peace.
At the moment, the carriers of sanctions deep into Russian territory are the Flamingo and Neptune missiles. The company Firepoint announced the launch of production of the first ones at the end of the summer. At that time, footage of the Flamingo launch appeared online. And some analysts suggested, in fact, that they flew as a greeting to the territory of occupied Crimea. The publication Welt reported that it was these missiles that destroyed the FSB base on the peninsula. 3 missiles left craters 15 meters in diameter each.
Explosion.
At the same time, German journalists reported that 50 missiles roll off the assembly line every month, with plans to reach 200 per month. And now the Russians have supposedly displayed the wreckage of a downed Flamingo missile. According to their information, it was hit on Russian territory by a Buk system at an altitude of 100 meters and a speed of 600 kilometers per hour. Judging by the serial number, the occupiers assume this is the 106th munition produced in September. There is no reliable confirmation that the Flamingo destroyed the FSB base. Military analysts believe that the successful strikes, and not just this one, could have been carried out by Neptune itself. Today, 3 modifications of it have already been tested and put into serial production in the Ukrainian defense industry. A fourth is in preparation. Testing is currently underway.
This is the long-range Neptune, which can reach 1,000 kilometers. It is currently undergoing testing. It has already achieved, let's say, some positive results, and going forward it will. The issue of putting it into serial production will be addressed in parallel. I believe this Neptune series makes the country more capable and reveals our combat potential. Because not every country in the world possesses cruise missiles, let alone cruise missiles that in the future will be both sea and land-based. And let's say with different ranges.
For obvious reasons, Ukrainian weapons manufacturers do not share much information about strikes against the aggressor. Thank you. But President Zelensky has admitted to the press that the defense forces even combine them. And this, analysts admit, is a successful practice that Ukrainians can adopt from their enemy. This
missile is likely to be more mass-produced, but also cheaper due to other factors. Compared to the high-tech one, which is the Neptune missile, and here there are a whole range of combinations. For example, the Neptune missile, being less detectable and more accurate, can be used for clearing a corridor or even the opposite. For instance, a number of Flamingo missiles, which will be highly visible but very cheap, will be used as decoy missiles to draw the attention of air defense forces. The enemy at that moment, while the less visible but precise Neptune missile passes through and delivers a targeted strike.
The Ukrainian defense industry is now nothing like it was at the start of the full-scale Russian aggression. The country's military and political leadership has finally realized that only local arms manufacturers can guarantee stable supplies of weapons to the front. Of course, provided there is adequate funding. But with each passing day, like the sky, the EU is being terrorized by more and more unknown drones, and Europeans and Scandinavians are increasingly interested not only in Ukraine's experience, but also in cooperating with Ukraine in producing weapons suited to the realities of modern warfare.
And now let's move to the Kupiansk direction of the front. The enemy is becoming more ferocious here as well. In the Kupiansk direction, there were 6 attacks by the occupiers over the past day. The defense forces repelled enemy assault actions in the areas of Kupiansk, Piszczanowe, Stepna, Novoselivka and Petropavlivka. Near the Russian border with Estonia, Russian military personnel, the so-called Little Green Men, have been spotted. And let me remind you, it was with this that in 2014, the temporary occupation of Crimea by the Russian army began. What are the current threats to Estonia and the entire Baltic region? What is the Kremlin dictator planning? Is he really going to attack again? This time in this region? We have gathered facts and opinions on this matter.
Putin's little green men are already at Estonia's doorstep. It seems the bunker dweller is preparing a Crimea 2.0 operation in Europe. Western media are publishing footage in which you can see armed men on the road. From their uniforms, it's clear these are definitely not Russian border guards. Due to the sudden activation of unidentified Russian troops in the areas of checkpoints between Russia and Estonia, the police department has urgently closed the country's eastern borders.
We decided to close the road to prevent possible provocations and incidents. Our main goal is the safety of the Estonian population. Gunter Pedosk, operational head of the southern prefecture.
The safety of their own population is the top priority for all Baltic countries. For example, today Latvia is expelling at least 841 Russian citizens from the country. This concerns Russians who were unable to prove even basic knowledge of the Latvian language. The EU country no longer wants to see the Kremlin's fifth column on its territory.
The stay of such Russians in Latvia will be considered illegal and their access to social services will be closed. If the Russians remain, they will face deportation. Madara Pukve, representative of the Latvian Office of Citizenship and Migration Affairs.
Due to the possible Russian attack on NATO, the alliance is preparing to evacuate 1,200,000 people. According to the authorities of Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, this is the number of citizens who would need to flee from war in the event of aggression from the Kremlin. We are talking about at least a 40-kilometer strip along the borders with Russia and Belarus. For Lithuania, this would mean a total evacuation. In that case, even the capital would fall into the potential frontline zone. However, in Vilnius, they are confident that such a scenario is unlikely.
An emergency situation of such scale, one that would require evacuating all of Vilnius, is unlikely to develop in just one day. That is, it may well be necessary to start with some localized evacuations, such as the eastern outskirts of the city or even individual neighborhoods. But we proceed from the assumption that ultimately our resources must be prepared for the evacuation of everyone, all 600,000 residents of Vilnius.
Meanwhile, in Estonia, which has closed its borders, they are already actively receiving internal migrants. Local churches, schools, universities, and sports arenas are being prepared. Special transportation, trains, and buses are being allocated for this purpose. Residents are being assigned to possible evacuation points and given maps with information about evacuation routes. Europeans themselves are stocking up on supplies, food, and first aid kits and are gathering emergency bags in case they need to flee suddenly.
People have been talking about this for a long time. For the past weeks and even months. At work, everywhere. We'll see what happens. For now, we need to take care of the most urgent things.
In total, the population of the Baltic countries exceeds 6 million people. Of these, almost 2.9 million live in Lithuania, nearly 2 million in Latvia, and 1.4 million people in Estonia. In Vilnius, evacuation plans are being prepared for about a quarter of the population. In Latvia, it's a third. In Estonia, 10%. And that's according to the most optimistic forecasts. According to military analysts, if Putin launches a full-scale offensive against the Baltic countries, every single resident there could become a displaced person. All the residents.
They have platforms for various types of missile systems that can strike in the shortest possible time. As one of our sources told us, these systems can literally be rolled out of garages. For example, at the Luga military base just 100 kilometers from the Estonian border, it takes only 5 minutes to load Iskander missiles and launch them in quantities sufficient to cover the entire territory of Estonia and most of Latvia.
Meanwhile, Russian propaganda is foaming at the mouth, insisting that the Kremlin's intentions are purely peaceful. And supposedly, the Baltic countries have nothing to fear. Even Bunkerman himself, putting on an innocent face, tries to reassure the West.
We have never initiated military confrontation ourselves. It's pointless, unnecessary, and simply absurd. They can't possibly believe that. They can't possibly believe what they're saying, that Russia is planning to attack NATO, because it's impossible to believe this nonsense.
Roughly speaking. Similarly, on the eve of February 2022, Moscow insisted they had no intention of invading Ukraine. Earlier in 2014, Putin also denied any involvement in the annexation of Crimea. Russian army soldiers. So it's no surprise that, at the first sight of little green men, the Baltic countries began preparing for the worst.
The nature of hybrid warfare is such that you might not realize whether it's already a war, an isolated attack, or just an accident. Like those damaged cables and communications in the Baltic Sea or the plane that recently crashed in Lithuania. An attack or an accident? Not to mention the constant problems with GPS signals in the area of the Suwałki corridor.
Adding fuel to the fire. In the situation at the border, Putin's loyal friend Alexander Lukashenko is actively stoking the flames. He has just carried out yet another dirty provocation. He suddenly put the troops in Belarus on alert. The country's Ministry of Defense cheerfully reported that units are already moving to designated areas to carry out the tasks assigned by Batka.
Units of the armed forces that are involved in the ongoing combat readiness check are now moving to their designated areas.
However, analysts insist that all of this is more for show than actual preparation for an invasion. Belarus will continue to constantly escalate the situation and threaten with combat readiness checks. As for the Russian army, it is so bogged down in the war in Ukraine that the Kremlin simply doesn't have the strength to open a second front. Nevertheless, everything could change quickly.
Recruiting new soldiers takes quite a long time, but in principle, it's probably a matter of 2 or 3 weeks. Something like that, because there are quite combat-ready units on the front in Ukraine. That is, all that's needed is to simply transfer them. That won't take much time. And then rearm and somehow reorganize them.
Among experts, there is also an opinion that Russia is already preparing for war with NATO, and it could strike earlier than intelligence agencies expect. For example, the American Institute for the Study of War claims that Moscow has entered the so-called Phase Zero in preparation for a confrontation with the alliance. Russia is creating reserves and working on new tactics of warfare without the mass use of armored vehicles, and is capable of launching new aggression without waiting for the full restoration of its army after the war with Ukraine. Whether Putin will back down or actually attack the Baltic countries, we will find out very soon.
That's all for today, but very soon on Front News, you'll see new, unique reports from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, brought to you so that you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.